Hi there guys, I hope you are having a good day. Now, Callum Smith has recently spoken about Chris Eubank Jr. and his potential world title opportunities going forwards, and the fact that he seems to always fall short when he steps up to that next level. So he's okay fighting guys around his level, but when he jumps up to world level and has a world title opportunity, he seems to fall short because he lacks that boxing ability to get him there. Now, we have seen this on two separate occasions, where he has been conclusively outboxed. In the first 6 rounds of the Billy Joe Saunders fight, second 6 rounds, he kind of came alive, and maybe that was down to Billy Joe Saunders getting tired, and that meant that Eubank's engine brought him back into the fight. And that wasn't necessarily down to boxing ability, but him having the gas tank to come on strong, and Billy Joe Saunders not necessarily being able to go down the stretch without having little breaks here and there, and not working when he should have or when he could have done if he was in shape. Then of course there was the George Groves fight where the gas tank didn't come into it. In fact, Chris Eubank Jr. was the one who got tired in the end, not George Groves, which was strange because many said that George Groves would get tired and get stopped late on in that fight, but that never happened. Chris Eubank Jr. was in a situation where he could not control, he was in there with a bigger, stronger man, and every time he tried to get close to him, George Groves had a hard right hand waiting for him. So what George Groves would do is stand off him, keep him at bay with the jab. He's got a brilliant jab, so he would do that to control Chris Eubank. Then, when he rushed in, right hand waiting for him. George Groves is surprisingly fast as well, and very powerful. I think it was Martin Murray who said he's more powerful than Gennady Golovkin, but it's just Golovkin is more consistent and more relentless with his punches, putting them together a lot better. But punching harder than Golovkin, that just shows how strong and how powerful those punches are. So that power was enough to make Chris Eubank Jr. think before he acted, to make him wonder, can I get past his punches? And there was very little head movement. There were no adjustments made from Chris Eubank, and that was the problem with George Groves, because Groves knew how to beat him. He knew that he could use his footwork, his positioning, his jab, and that right hand, and he could beat him that way. When they got in close, he would tie him up and turn him on the ropes, something he undoubtedly worked on with his trainer Shane McGuigan. So they had the correct game plan to beat Chris Eubank Jr. and the boxing ability to execute it. Now, the question is, did Chris Eubank Jr. even have a game plan going in there with George Groves? Did he have one going in there with Billy Joe Saunders? That is the big question. I don't believe he did. Because while he had a trainer for the Billy Joe Saunders fight, he did not have a trainer for the George Groves fight, and that was his undoing, aside from other things as well. But not having a trainer in a world title fight, obviously he had advice from Ronnie Davis and his father, but that's not enough. You need a trainer, and that was one thing he was truly lacking. And that game plan, who put together the game plan? Was it him? Was it his father, Ronnie Davis? Who was it? In that fight, he just kept trying the same things over and over again, and it was never going to work, especially in there with a quality operator like George Groves, someone who's been to world level, had fights against Badu Jack, against Carl Froch as well, twice in front of many fans. So he's been there before, he's a well-seasoned pro, and even though he was only a year older than Chris Eubank Jr., he still had a wealth of experience that he could use against him. That was the problem. There were so many factors, more so than him not necessarily having a good boxing brain or having good boxing ability. There were more factors than just that. Not having a coach, lack of experience at that level, and an inability to adjust, which also falls under the game plan as well. So you would have to wonder, how would he react if he did have a trainer and someone guiding him? He would be better, but there are still things that need to be worked on for Chris Eubank Jr. before he can go to that level and get a win. Of course he has a win over Arthur Abrahams, which is a former world champion, but come on, Arthur Abrahams was shot by that point. He barely threw any punches in the fight. He was constantly backed up. Under pressure, he just tried to survive. So that was a win, yes, against a quality top level opponent, just past his best. So he does need a quality win against someone like a Charlo or a Golovkin or someone else around that level. The question is he able to get that? Because in the past, as Callum Smith explained, when we see him jump up to that level, he does often fall short. The Korobov fight, that was going to be a very tricky fight for him if it didn't end the way it did. I'm not saying that Korobov would have beaten him, but still, I believe that that was going to be a very tricky fight. And in fact, that could have been the fight that he needed it to go 12 rounds or 10 rounds or however long it may have lasted if Korobov didn't get injured. That could have been very important to the development of Chris Eubank Jr. because he is in his 30s now, but I don't buy too much into that. I don't ever think that when someone's in their 30s, they are going towards the end of their careers. Look at Joe Joyce. He's only just starting to work on the world stage, and he's in his mid-30s, so that doesn't mean anything. He can still learn, he can still adjust, but it's down to the mindset. It's down to him saying, I have to adjust, I have to change these things. That is the most important thing, and I believe he will do that under Roy Jones Jr. Because there is this physical ability there is this natural talent that Chris Eubank Jr. does have in some ways, but there is also the other side that you have to develop those talents. Canelo is someone who has done that brilliantly during his career, going through into his 30s. He's a better fighter now than he was 2 or 3 years ago when he was apparently in his peak when he was 28 or 27. So he's a better fighter now than he was then. That shows you can still learn going further into your career. You never stop learning. That is something though that Chris Eubank Jr. needs to understand, that he can still learn. Another thing that I have seen from him is he will go from someone who's lower level, maybe British level, and then jump to world level. There is no in-between fight. I mean, there was, I guess, when he went into George Groves after beating Arthur Abrahams, but again, it wasn't the best Arthur Abrahams. I believe that he jumps too quickly to those fights, and then when he has like a comeback or whatever, it's against a lower level opposition. Then he gets back in and fights a top level contender. He's not afraid of anyone, he'll fight anyone, but I believe there needs to be this kind of middle fight for Chris Eubank Jr., especially now he's working with Roy Jones. So maybe a David Lemieux, someone like that. He just needs that middle fight. That is going to be very important going forwards in his career. His best weight is middleweight. Callum Smith said that as well. I agree with it. His best weight is middleweight, not super middleweight. He's strong, he's powerful, he's fast at that weight class. And considering he doesn't necessarily put on more weight when he moves up, the guys at super middleweight are so much bigger now and so much stronger, a lot taller. They punch quite hard, but then again, Chris Eubank does have a very good chin. But still, there are things that he would be giving away in the George Groves fight. The power, the speed, and the ability to tie him up and have his way was very important as well. So Chris Eubank Jr. is giving more away when he moves up to super middleweight, as opposed to staying in the middleweight division, where he is probably going to be the bigger man, or at least match his opponent for size. And apparently, according to his new promoter Kalle Sauerland, the #1 target is Gennady Golovkin. Before he gets to that point though, he does need that middle fight. Gennady Golovkin straight away might be just too much, and he might fall short just by a margin once again. I mean, Gennady Golovkin, yes, he's older now, but still, he only has 1 defeat on his resume coming against Canelo. He's still a very good fighter who is adjusting himself, so Chris Eubank Jr. will need to be at the top of his game to even give him a good fight. So that could be important, and a very interesting fight going forwards. I would like to see it. Great fight. Guys, anyway, what are your thoughts on this? Make sure you leave your thoughts in the comments below, leave a thumbs up, and subscribe if you are new. Thanks guys.